I'm a big fan of the book Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. It's great, it's fantastic, a true book of wisdom. But after reading the book of Proverbs, I now kind of think of Meditations as a great sequel, but a sequel nonetheless. Proverbs is a book in the Old Testament of the Bible, and it was primarily written by the wise man known as Solomon, although two other authors, Agur and Lemuel, also contributed to the work. Essentially, the book of Proverbs is just that. It is a book of Proverbs. Sayings that are about, one or two sentences long most of the time, but jam-packed with golden nuggets of wisdom. And, I made the comparison earlier in this review to Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, and that book is obviously different than Proverbs, but it's very similar in that it's also a book that's jam-packed with a bunch of timeless truths that are often, brought to light with very few words. And, I just gotta say, of all the books of the Old Testament, Proverbs is the most practical book. It's the one that you can definitely go, here's how I can live my life better. It is, in many ways, you can look at the book of Proverbs as almost a guidebook for how to live your life and how to treat others and how to conduct yourself in the world, how to become a wise man. And so I loved Proverbs. I honestly, it was fantastic all the way through. I marked at least one proverb on just about every single page of this book. So this video might go a little long, but that's only because there's so much to unpack here and there's so much important stuff to unpack here. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, let's please jump into the review and analysis portion of this video, and let's check out all the different verses and passages within the book of Proverbs that I found particularly deep, particularly compelling, and particularly wise. We begin with Proverbs chapter 1, verse 7. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and discipline. Positing some other authority above yourself, some other truly good, superior, being or force above you, it forces you to become humble. And the idea, at least to me here, is the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, because the fear of the Lord is the beginning of humility. And really, only humble people can learn. Only humble people can really appreciate wisdom and discipline. Because fools despise wisdom and discipline, as is written here. Proverbs chapter 3, verses 27 to 28 really detail just really good advice about being a good person. I'm just going to go ahead and read them. Do not withhold good from those who deserve it, when it is in your power to act. Do not say to your neighbor, come back later, I'll give it tomorrow, when you now have it with you. I mean, that's kind of just like enough said little snippet there, but it's something to remember, because I find myself lots of times I'm lazy, I'm like, I don't really want to help this person at the moment. I could definitely help them, but I don't want to. I do find myself kind of being that way every now and then, but that's wrong. If you can help someone and do good for someone now, it is in your power to do so, then you should do it, because otherwise you might as well be sinning. I believe there is a verse that says, he who knows the good that he can do and then does not do it, I believe this is in the book of James, sins. And so, help people as soon as you get the chance, basically. Now this next passage, which is Proverbs chapter 4, verses 26 through 27, is, I think it has some political implications. And as I read this little 2-verse passage, I think you will pick up what I've just put down there by making that reference to politics. Make level paths for your feet, and take only ways that are firm. Do not swerve to the right or the left. Keep your foot from evil. Now, obviously, when this was written, this was not talking about liberals or conservatives or, Republicans or Democrats. Obviously, that would be insane to think that it was talking about that. However, in light of today, these verses I do think have some practical applications to the political sphere, in that, it says, make level paths for your feet and take only ways that are firm. Do not swerve to the right or to the left. Keep your foot from evil. what I get there is stay away from extremes. Unless, of course, the extreme is justified, but beware of them. Be careful to not swerve to the right or to the left, because most of what we have in our political shenanigans in America and just across the world, most of it is just that. It's shenanigans. And, you should not swerve to the right or to the left, because you might step in, you might step into evil if you do. You might find yourself on the far right with the KKK, or you might find yourself on the far left with, communist anarchists. Now, this next passage is, it's just nice. It's talking about the ladies, and kind of illustrates just how, warm women can be and loving. And it's, it's also a cautionary verse as well. A cautionary passage, rather. And I just really like it. There's not too much to talk about here, but it's something that I do think is worth reading, just as a reminder, if you happen to have forgotten this passage. May your fountain be blessed, and may you rejoice in the wife of your youth, a loving doe, a graceful deer. May her breasts satisfy you always. May you ever be captivated by her love. Why be captivated, my son, by an adulteress? Why embrace the bosom of another man's wife? For a man's ways are in full view of the Lord, and he examines all his paths. The evil deeds of a wicked man ensnare him. The cords of his sin hold him fast. He will die for lack of discipline, led astray by his own great folly. One thing I will say about that passage is verses 18 and 19 are very different in contrast to 20 through 23, in that, the passage starts off saying, hey, ladies, they're amazing. Enjoy them. Just, always, appreciate them. They're amazing. They're just incredible, which is all very good stuff. But then the rest of the passage is like, hey. Be wary, though, of the temptations associated with women, because you may be led astray by your own great folly by falling in love with a beautiful woman who is really not a beautiful person, or you may be led astray by your own great folly by falling in love with a beautiful woman and not being disciplined about how you court that girl or approach that girl. And so, there's obviously a lot there, but that's what I got from it. Now, the next several minutes of this video are going to be dealing with Proverbs chapter 10. And, I've just got several different verses I want to go over. So we will begin with verse 7. The memory of the righteous will be a blessing, but the name of the wicked will rot. The memory of the righteous, let's say somebody who's generally thought to be pretty amazing, Abraham Lincoln. Okay, people think of him as a great blessing on Western civilization, which he was. And so that is why his reputation has always remained very, very, very high amongst most circles. But the name of the wicked will rot. Hitler, that name, has been rotting for decades upon decades and will continue to rot for decades and decades and decades more. Centuries. And if the world is just, it will rot for centuries. But it is true, if you live a righteous life, a good life, if you are a good man or you are a good woman, whether you have a giant impact on the world or not, you will be remembered as a blessing. Your memory will be a blessing. But if you are a horrible, 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 horrible human being, a genocidal maniac like Hitler, or you're just a jerk, you will be forgotten, or you'll be remembered only as rot. Moving on to verse 9. The man of integrity walks securely, but he who takes crooked paths will be found out. This is absolutely true. And I bring up this next name not to be political, but to make a specific point about a specific subject. Namely integrity and security in that integrity. The former Vice President of the United States, Mike Pence, he famously, it came out that he would not meet with a female person unless his wife was also there with him. I believe that was the big story that he was essentially made fun of for by every comedian across the board. All of these comedians said, Mike Pence can't control himself around women, therefore he always makes sure that he has his wife there to make sure that he doesn't try to, sexually assault them. And I remember feeling really a lot of anger towards those comedians and towards those talk show people, those pundits, because they were so stupid. Like, so stupid. Mike Pence, whether you like him or not, that situation was very wise on his part, because he was a man who walked with integrity on that issue, and it was provable that he walked with integrity on that issue because his wife was always there with him. That way, if anyone ever accused him of sexual assault, as happens to every single politician ever now, everybody would immediately know that the accuser was full of crap, because Mike Pence always had his wife with him, always made sure that his integrity was intact and that he was secure in that. And so, as I said, the man of integrity, or as the book says, the man of integrity walks securely. Mike Pence, on the issue of, sexual assaults, all that stuff, at least in the time that he's been married and has been a professional politician, he walks securely on that issue. No one can touch him. But he who takes crooked paths will be found out. Me Too. That whole movement. Mike Pence will never be Me Too'd for all the reasons I just listed. But many men have been Me Too'd and will be Me Too'd because they took crooked paths and eventually they are found out. Now, obviously, there are a lot of guys who get accused of things that they did not actually do, and that's tragic and that's horrible. But, there are Harvey Weinsteins of the world who took crooked paths and were eventually found out. Verse 12, I also like a lot. Hatred stirs up dissension, but love covers over all wrongs. Enough said. Verse 14, wise men store up knowledge, but the mouth of a fool invites ruin. I absolutely agree with this. Really, to become wise, you have to do a lot of work. You've got to read a lot, and you've got to experience the world as much as you can. And that knowledge will then inform you how to live the rest of your life. But obviously, the mouth of a fool invites ruin, in that the mouth of a fool is usually, a fool usually speaks on things that they don't actually know. They don't actually have any knowledge about. And so, they invite their own ruin. And I've found myself doing this before, where there's something that I think I'm passionate about, but I'm not really passionate about, but I'm speaking extremely passionately about it. And somebody calls me out, and it becomes very apparent to everyone who's observing that I don't know what I'm talking about. I invite my own ruin because I couldn't hold my tongue. I couldn't do the wise thing and try to store up knowledge before speaking on a subject that I don't know anything about. Verse 17 I also find very compelling. He who heeds discipline shows the way to life, but whoever ignores correction leads others astray. This is absolutely true. Discipline equals freedom. I believe that's Jocko Willink's big phrase. It's absolutely true. And, he who ignores correction not only leads himself astray, not only prevents himself from improving, but, it is true. Rebels always, the rebellious contrarian types, they always do take a certain number of followers with them and lead them astray. Now, obviously, some rebels are great, but there are some that, for goodness sake, we have these cult leaders that claim to be Jesus Christ, and they lead other people astray because they ignore the correction that people, direct at them, which is, you're not Jesus Christ, bro. That was a weird example, but long story short, discipline equals freedom. A lack of discipline equals ruin. Verse 19, also so good. When words are many, sin is not absent, but he who holds his tongue is wise. This is absolutely true. It's very hard to put this proverb into practice because, many of us, are very passionate about many things, and we want to, speak our mind on those things. But if you let your tongue get away from you, you can, sin and say something you didn't really mean, or say something that was really, really, really stupid. But he who holds his tongue and listens before speaking, that is a wise person. That is a person who, even if they're wrong about what they're discussing, at least that person will more than likely gain the respect of the other person simply because they listened and held their tongue and waited to speak at the right moment. Moving on to chapter 11, we will start with verse 3. The integrity of the upright guides them, but the unfaithful are destroyed by their duplicity. The integrity of the upright guides them. They are of one mind. They are not, they're not living a double life. And so they're much more secure in who they are and what they plan to do in their life. Whereas the unfaithful are destroyed by their duplicity, in that, look, if you're living a double life and one of those lives you're trying to keep secret, it's very hard to do. And it's very likely that you will be destroyed by that duplicity. That duplicity of the mind and of the actions in the world. Verse 4, wealth is worthless in the day of wrath, but righteousness delivers from death. Obviously, if you're not religious, then you probably think that this is a bunch of mumbo jumbo. But if you are religious, this is really, really important. This is basically saying, look, wealth, gold, all that stuff, the riches of this world, materialism, the fame, money, fortune, all that stuff, it's really worthless in the end. But if you are righteous, if you serve God, faithfully and justly, then you will be delivered from death. You will conquer death. And while you will not take the riches of this world with you, you will gain new riches in the next one. Verse 9 is a very stoic verse. With his mouth, the godless destroys his neighbor, but through knowledge, the righteous escape. The reason I say this is stoic is, in Stoicism, the idea is that, you should accept all external circumstances, accept what is out of your control, and you cannot really be hurt unless you allow those external circumstances to hurt you. And so here, it says, with his mouth, the godless destroys his neighbor. We see people all the time slandered in the media, all the time. Bullied, all this horrible crap. But a knowledgeable, righteous person can escape all of this if they have what's in here. What's in here the bastards can't take from you is the point. Even if you are chained up in, the Soviet Union and tortured, if you still have what's in here, if you still have knowledge, you still have understanding, you still have words of wisdom like the Proverbs or other verses from the Bible or other strong sayings by strong people, you can escape the diminishing of your soul by another person. Verse 22 I find to be a very, very interesting verse. I'll go ahead and read it and I'll explain why. Like a gold ring and a pig's snout is a beautiful woman who shows no discretion. I often think that beauty is a blessing and a curse for anybody, but particularly women, because beauty is emphasized so much more for women. The reason I say all of that is because so often, I'll just be honest, most of the extremely beautiful women that I've met in my life have been the most boring and just disreputable people I've ever met. Rude, all this stuff. Usually, the women that are awesome are the women who don't look good, but to overcome that fact, they have become incredibly interesting people, or they are women that do look good but don't know it. That is, generally speaking, my experience. But the women that are undeniably hot to themselves, they are usually boring, rude people because they've never had to work for anything in their life. They've never had to work to be interesting because men and everyone has been interested in them since the day they were born. And this verse relates to all of that. It says, like a gold ring in a pig's snout is a beautiful woman who shows no discretion. This verse is very illuminating in regard to what I just said about beauty, in that, the gold ring in a pig's snout, it's like a gold ring can be beautiful, but it's on a pig. It's disgusting. It's just because, you've got like something beautiful there doesn't negate the fact that the whole of that being is disgusting. Likewise, the beauty of a woman, the outward beauty of a woman, does not make the whole of what that woman is beautiful. That beauty will not overcome the fact that she shows no discretion and is a horrible human being. That's what it's saying. That's what it's saying. Essentially, it's just saying, look, if you're beautiful, great. But you're not done yet. You haven't made it. You've got to work on yourself still, because your beauty is just one thing. It alone is not great if it's attached to a horrible, horrible pig of a human. Verses 24 through 27, I want to just go ahead and read because they're just simple truths that are so, so, so very good. One man gives freely, yet gains even more. Another withholds unduly, but comes to poverty. A generous man will prosper. He who refreshes others will himself be refreshed. People curse the man who hoards grain, but blessing crowns him who is willing to sell. He who seeks good finds goodwill, but evil comes to him who searches for it. Now, verses 25 and 26 are just great on their own. They're kind of like enough said, just like truths. But verses 24, it says, one man gives freely, yet gains even more. Another withholds unduly, but comes to poverty. That is true. That is true more so on a spiritual sense than anything else. Let's take, for example, Ebenezer Scrooge. Okay, we all know that name. He withheld unduly throughout that story and came to poverty in the soul in a large part. Now, obviously, there was like a redemption story and all this sort of stuff, if I'm remembering it all correctly. But that is true. The rich and greedy people that you see out there in the world are often the most unhappy people. They come to poverty where it counts. But he who gives freely gains even more. Often he gains even more financially, but more importantly, he gains more in here. Now moving on to chapter 12, we will begin with verse 16. A fool shows his annoyance at once, but a prudent man overlooks an insult. All the time, in this day and age of social media, people freak out at the smallest slights directed their way. I mean, they explode, they melt down. Particularly on places like Twitter. Suffice to say, Twitter is primarily populated by a bunch of fools. These people are foolish to just explode at every, try and get people canceled. It's so foolish. But a prudent man overlooks an insult. I always have more respect for people that can take one on the chin than people that, are a wet mop. Also, if you can overlook an insult, then the person who insulted you in many ways is forced to respect you because you just overcame what they just threw at you. It prevents them from winning. Verse 18, I also like, reckless words pierce like a sword, but the tongue of the wise brings healing. This is obviously true. Verse 25, I think, is definitely worth going over. An anxious heart weighs a man down, but a kind word cheers him up. A lot of people, they underrate the value of a kind word. I mean, sometimes I feel down, and if somebody says, hey man, how you doing? I saw something you did. That was great. That was terrific. Or maybe I just was having a bad day and I did do something particularly good and somebody appreciated it. It brings me up. It distracts me from my anxious heart. And this is definitely true. I mean, I've heard suicide stories, people who were suicidal, who they were saved literally by a kind word. a kind word that alleviated the anxiety and depression in their heart. And so do not ever underrate the power of a kind word. Verse 7 of chapter 13, I truly love. I'm going to read it and I'll tell you exactly why I love it so much. One man pretends to be rich, yet has nothing. Another pretends to be poor, yet has great wealth. In American culture in particular, there is a whole culture of people trying to live beyond their means. And they often come to ruin because of that, because there's some sort of financial crisis and they can't pay their debts and they come to bankruptcy and all this sort of stuff. They live beyond their means. They pretend to be rich and yet they're really poor, and they reap what they sow because of all that. But one of the things that's particularly interesting about some people that are rich are the ones who live like everyone else. They don't have a giant mansion. They have a regular car. They live, a regular life. And so in a sense, they pretend to be poor, yet they have great wealth. Now that is, obviously the literal interpretation of this verse, the literal reality of it. But this also has a deeper moral value to it, in that there are many people that pretend to be wise. They pretend to be, superior. There are many Pharisees out there. They pretend to be rich with knowledge and righteousness and all this stuff, and yet they are actually very poor on the inside. We see this with a lot of, preachers, even, who, they talk up, oh, I'm so spiritual, so amazing, all this stuff, and then, they are accused of sexual assault. They prove to be, actually incredibly poor spiritually. But then again, there are those who are great leaders or are great people who don't try to be anything more than what they are. They don't try to show everyone how good of a person they are. They don't try to show, they don't try to, get people to believe that they are rich with righteousness and goodness, and yet they are rich with righteousness and goodness. And, so another pretends to be poor, yet has great wealth. That is absolutely true. Both in the literal sense and in the more moral, spiritual sense, this verse is absolute magic. But verse 24 of verse 13, is definitely a verse that I think upsets a lot of, housewife type people, but it is absolutely true. If people followed this verse, if parents followed this verse, then we would not have all the problems that we have today. The problems would be significantly diminished. But, we happen to live in the end times, so the problems are big, as big as they can get. But verse 24, he who spares the rod hates his son, but he who loves him is careful to discipline him. This is absolutely true. If you want good kids, well-developed citizens, they need to be disciplined. They need to understand discipline. I once knew a kid who was the son of one of the richest people in my state. The guy had 6 TVs in his basement. He had a bunch of guns. The man's father was filthy rich, and he just let his son enjoy all the riches, and yet his son was, I gotta say, his son was a loser because he had never been disciplined. He had never had to work for anything in his life, and so he was underdeveloped. He was hated, essentially. I'm sure that his parents probably didn't hate him, but their actions led to his ruin, at least at the time that I met him in my life. And so, he who spares the rod hates his son. Most parents in American society wear kitty gloves, even with their adult children. And they wonder why their adult children aren't grown-ups yet. They wonder why they have so many dysfunctions. It's because they spared the rod. But again, he who loves his son is careful to discipline him. I was disciplined in my life growing up. I am so thankful for it. I'm not even being disciplined by my parents anymore. I'm being disciplined by myself. But in order to have that self-discipline, one must first understand what discipline as a concept even is by experiencing it as a child growing up. Moving on to chapter 14, verse 6, the mocker seeks wisdom and finds none, but knowledge comes easily to the discerning. This I find very true. I know a lot of people in my life who, they just like to make fun of things without really attempting to understand them. Like, say an idea comes their way, and at face value it seems like a really stupid idea, and they just mock it and they dismiss the idea. When in reality, the idea may be absolutely true. It might be absolutely valuable. And the discerning are the only people that come to value such an idea. Whereas the mockers, as I said, they just dismiss it offhand. And I think this is true in that, there are a lot of atheists who have never read the Bible. And, reading the Bible may not convert an atheist, but to deny that there is worth to the Bible, that is the thinking of a mocker who is missing out on the wisdom found in books like the book of Proverbs. Now, verse 13 in chapter 14, it's a really, whenever I read it, it just kind of struck me as very true. There's not something that's really practical here, but it's just a really good piece of writing. Even in laughter, the heart might ache, and joy may end in grief. Absolutely true. One of the things you'll notice about a lot of comedians and just really funny people is they're often very depressed. Their hearts are aching. They've had a rough time, and they are making light. They're trying to cope with the heartache within by, bringing humor to the table. Verse 15, I think, is very applicable to our current day and age. A simple man believes anything, but a prudent man gives thoughts to his steps. It's so annoying to see people just go, so Kevin Hart believes this, therefore I'm going to believe it too. Or Taylor Swift supports this candidate, must be a good candidate. It's so annoying to see so many people in my time prove to be very simple-minded and believe anything. Whereas they could be prudent men and women who give thoughts to their steps. By reading, by investigating, by learning, by developing a scope to see the world clearly. Moving on to verse 30, a heart at peace gives life to the body, but envy rots the bones. This is absolutely true. Look, if you are content in your heart, you live more fully. You live a more peaceful life. But if you are envious of others, always wanting what someone else has, there will always be this feeling of rot within you. This feeling of not being whole. And it's your fault, because it is your choice to be envious. Moving on to verse 31, he who oppresses the poor shows contempt for their maker, but whoever is kind to the needy honors God. I just love that. Moving on to chapter 15, verse 1. This sentence is, it's one of those just beautiful, simple, yet extremely powerful pieces of writing. A gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. Avoid those harsh words. Avoid those harsh words. And now on to chapter 16, verse 18. Pride goes before destruction, a haughty spirit before a fall. This is so true. Pride, arrogance, it's one of those things that, as I've kind of already said, if you speak out of turn, you speak so confidently about something you don't actually know much about, you can get caught by someone that does know what they're talking about, and you can fall. I mean, obviously, that's just one example of pride going before destruction. But it's a good one, and there are obviously many, 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 many others. Pride goes before destruction, a haughty spirit before a fall. That is an eternal truth. Now on to verse 19. Better to be lowly in spirit and among the oppressed than to share plunder with the proud. This is so true. Better to, live a humble life, a poor in finance life or whatever, than to share in the riches of Matthew McConaughey from The Wolf of Wall Street. To close out chapter 16, verse 32, better a patient man than a warrior, a man who controls his temper than one who takes a city. I'm going to read what my Life Application Bible says of this verse because I think it encapsulates exactly what I think of this verse. Self-control is superior to conquest. Success in business, school, or home life can be ruined by a person who has lost control of his or her temper. So it is a great personal victory to control your temper. When you feel yourself ready to explode, remember that losing control may cause you to forfeit what you want the most. Next verse I want to talk about comes in chapter 17, and it is verse 14, and it reads, starting a quarrel is like breaching a dam, so drop the matter before a dispute breaks out. This is a proverb that I have memorized because growing up in my family, there was a lot of conflict over nonsense. And, it really is, sometimes I find myself just ready for a fight for no particular reason, and I have to remind myself that starting a quarrel is like breaching a dam. You might end up saying something that ruins everything potentially, So drop the matter before a dispute breaks out. Drop the matter before it's too late. Now, verse 2 of chapter 18, I find it's really funny, but it's absolutely true, and that's why it's funny. A fool finds no pleasure in understanding, but delights in airing his own opinions. This is absolutely true. I feel like this verse is much like the old saying, he who screams the loudest often knows the least. Anytime you find somebody who's just like, I'm a Republican, or I'm a Democrat, and you're an idiot for disagreeing with me. Generally speaking, those people have no idea what they're talking about. All they care about is airing their own ill-founded opinions. Verse 13 of chapter 18, magic. He who answers before listening, that is his folly and his shame. Most of the world's problems would be solved if we all listened before answering, instead of answering before listening. Now, moving on to verse 19 of chapter 19. A hot-tempered man must pay the penalty. If you rescue him, you will have to do it again. So often, I see parents, I see friends rescue idiots from the consequences of their own actions, when the only way that the idiot is going to learn is to experience the consequences of their own actions. And so a hot-tempered man must pay the penalty. You might as well say idiot or, fool. They must pay the penalty, because if you rescue them, you'll have to do it again, because they won't learn from their mistakes because you did not allow them to. Now, moving on to verse 3 of chapter 20, I really love this one. It is to a man's honor to avoid strife, but every fool is quick to quarrel. That's just enough said kind of proverb. Moving on to verse 25, it is a trap for a man to dedicate something rashly, and only later to consider his vows. This verse is so wise, because so often you see people get married to someone that they don't really know well enough, but whom they're madly in love with, in that their emotions are just on a high, and they make a rash decision without really considering the vows that they make when they marry that person. And you see the consequences of that whenever, they're divorced and their kids are emotionally disturbed. And it really is a trap for a man to dedicate something rashly and only later to consider his vows. Now, verse 13 of chapter 21 is a gut punch of a proverb. If a man shuts his ears to the cry of the poor, he too will cry out and not be answered. All day, every day, people walk by homeless people on the street, don't pay them any mind. Maybe the person's asking for food. We all see people out there with the cardboard signs and whatnot, and we just drive by. But if a man shuts his ears to the cry of the poor, he too will cry out if he ends up poor like them, and will not be answered. Something to think about. I think we all have to do better about taking care of the needy. Because damn it, we would want to be taken care of, wouldn't we? Moving on to verse 14 of chapter 25. Like clouds and wind without rain is a man who boasts of gifts he does not give. All that you can take with you is that which you give away. Moving on to verses 21 and 22. If your enemy is hungry, give him food to eat. If he is thirsty, give him water to drink. In doing this, you will heap burning coals on his head, and the Lord will reward you. This is very reminiscent of the the idea in the New Testament of love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. The idea being, if you love your enemies, then it will be like heaping burning coals on their head, and you will be rewarded. If you feed them, if you give them water to drink, if you do this for your enemies, they will cease to be your enemies. And they will come to respect you, hopefully. But that is the power of forgiveness. So whenever it says heaping burning coals on your head, it's not literally meaning that, obviously. It just means that you will be destroying your enemy as an enemy and transforming them into a friend. Moving on to verse 5 of chapter 26. Answer a fool according to his folly, or he will be wise in his own eyes. Often the best way to get someone to realize the absurdity of their position is simply to play the game they're playing and follow their ideas to their logical conclusion. And if you do that, he'll probably recognize it. Maybe. Hopefully he'll recognize it. But if you don't do that, then the fool will continue to be a fool who thinks that he's wise. And now we come to chapter 27, and I would like to start with verse 5. Better is open rebuke than hidden love. This is very similar to the proverb of, he who spares the rod hates his son. In that, it's like, better is open rebuke than hidden love. Better is, hey, you're fat, man. I love you, but you're fat. You're gonna get diabetes. You might get heart disease. You might die, man. Better is that sort of open rebuke than hiding that and letting your friend eat themselves to death. I mean, that's just one example, but that's what I think this is really getting at. Better is open rebuke than hidden love. Better to say, hey, you've got a drug problem, man. You got to stop it, than to, be like, I don't want to offend my friend. I don't want him to get upset. Real love involves telling hard truths. If you're not willing to tell the truth, if you're not willing to discipline your children, if you're not willing to do that, then you don't love those people. You actually are hurting them. You think you're helping them, but all you're doing is nothing, which is hurting them. Verse 6 continues this theme. Wounds from a friend can be trusted, but an enemy multiplies kisses. A friend who tells you you've got a problem that you've got to fix. I love you, man, but you drink too much. You got to stop it. You got to stop it now. A friend like that can be trusted. But a kiss up, a guy who kisses your ass, a yes man will be the ruin of you. A yes man is an enemy. Verse 11 of chapter 29 I have memorized because it's another one of those simple but very powerful truths. A fool gives full vent to his anger, but a wise man keeps himself under control. You've got to resist that impulse to just explode, because it's very foolish to explode. Most of the time when you explode, you look like a fool. Like it says. But a wise man keeps himself under control. A person who keeps himself under control under pressure, who is well-spoken, and who does not shy away from criticism, but who takes it head-on without faltering and without exploding, that is a wise man. Now this next passage comes from the sayings of Agur. I don't really know who Agur is, but he says some very wise things. And this is from chapter 30, and this is verses 7 through 9. 2 things I ask of you, O Lord. Do not refuse me before I die. Keep falsehood and lies far from me. Give me neither poverty nor riches, but give me only my daily bread. Otherwise I may have too much and disown you, and say, who is the Lord? Or I may become poor and steal, and so dishonor the name of my God. There's a lot there. I really appreciate where he says, don't give me too much, or I may disown you and say, who is the Lord? Because it is true. Very often, we're seeing it right now in America. Everybody rises to a certain level of prosperity, and we think, well, who needs God? I mean, you see it with the Israelites over and over and over in the book of Kings. And they go, well, who is the Lord? We are. That's what we think. But then it's like that inevitably eventually leads to a people's ruin. And Agur is basically saying, please keep this from happening, because then, if I rise to prosperity and think myself to be God, question who the Lord is, and then come to ruin because of that, I may further my depravity by stealing just to stay alive, and so dishonor God. And so, give me neither poverty nor riches, but give me only my daily bread. It's a balance between extremes. Too much, and you kind of go nuts. Too little, you kind of go nuts. You got to stay, stable, content with only that which is necessary. Just very wise piece of scripture here. Now, the final passage I want to go over has to do with the ladies again. And it is verses 10 to the end of Proverbs, so 10 to 31 of chapter 31. And this passage basically describes what is a godly woman, what is a noble woman. And there are many things in here that some people might think are, old conceptions of what a great woman is. But man, it is beautiful to read it. And I think there is, people denigrate the old-fashioned way of being. And I think that's a very bad thing to do, a very rash thing to do. I'll read the passage and we'll go over what I think of it. A wife of noble character, who can find? She is worth far more than rubies. Her husband has full confidence in her and lacks nothing of value. She brings him good, not harm, all the days of her life. She selects wool and flax and works with her eager hands. She is like the merchant ships, bringing her food from afar. She gets up while it is still dark. She provides food for her family and portions for her servant girls. She considers a field and buys it. Out of her earnings she plants a vineyard. She sets about her work vigorously. Her arms are strong for her tasks. She sees that her trading is profitable, and her lamp does not go out at night. In her hand she holds the distaff and grips the spindle with her fingers. She opens her arms to the poor and extends her hands to the needy. When it snows, she has no fear for her household, for all of them are clothed in scarlet. She makes coverings for her bed. She is clothed in fine linen and purple. Her husband is respected at the city gate, where he takes his seat among the elders of the land. She makes linen garments and sells them, and supplies the merchants with sashes. She is clothed with strength and dignity. She can laugh at the days to come. She speaks with wisdom, and faithful instruction is on her tongue. She watches over the affairs of her household and does not eat the bread of idleness. Her children arise and call her blessed, her husband also, and he praises her. Many women do noble things, but you surpass them all. Charm is deceptive and beauty is fleeting, but a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. Give her the reward she has earned, and let her works bring her praise at the city gate. Now, when I mentioned, the old-fashioned way of doing things, there's obviously clearly a distinction, almost like you might say a gender role here. As the man works at the city gate, he takes his seat among the elders, whereas she is at home, she's making food, she's taking care of children, she's doing more charitable work. This is the, older conception of a woman's role in society here. But nevertheless, obviously, women can do many, many, many things. They can do all sorts of great things. They can be great business people. They can do all this stuff, and all that stuff should be encouraged. However, what I just read there is so beautiful, and that conception of a woman, it is denigrated these days, but a loving mother who takes care of her children, supports her husband, has her husband's back. And, it even said here, she buys a vineyard, takes care of it. She is, in a way, an independent woman in that respect. She has agency over what she does, at least in this passage. And I just, in this day and age, it's almost like women who have a more traditional way of being are denigrated as being not independent, as not having agency. When, if society did not have women like that, society would fall apart completely, I think. And I've got to say, I just love the way that passage closes. It talks about the husband praising his wife and just people praising her for her nobility. And it says there, charm is deceptive and beauty is fleeting, but a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. That honestly is like one of the best verses ever, because it is true. Charm is deceptive. There are many like very witty, funny women out there, but who aren't really that great of people when you really get down to it. Charm is deceptive, beauty is fleeting. That is absolutely true. What matters in the long run is not the looks of a woman, it's who she is inside. A woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. So ladies and gentlemen, to wrap this video up, Proverbs is one of the best books in the entire Bible, Old Testament and New Testament. It is a true book of wisdom. I got so much out of it, obviously, considering that I just sat here for the past couple hours going through all the Proverbs that I got something out of. And it really is, it's an amazing book. And I will say, Proverbs is a book that you could recommend to someone who has never read the Bible and just say, hey, check out what's in this specific book to pique your interest, to see if you want to read more of the Bible. But anyways, ladies and gentlemen, now I want to know what you think of the book of Proverbs. Leave whatever comments or questions you may have in the comment section below and let me know what you thought of it. And as always, ladies and gentlemen, if you like this video, please like it and subscribe. Tell your friends about the channel. And never forget to